Afternoon and welcome to our NACRA webinar. We are delighted to have you and so appreciate your time today. Today, we are delighted to tell you that this is the second in our 2026 series of webinars, and that we are hopeful to have additional ones. Starting in May, we have our Dementia Week, and on Tuesday, May 19th, we will be featuring ex-governor of Wisconsin, Martin Schreiber, on caregiving and Alzheimer's, along with Dr. Matthew Barrett, who was with us last year. He's a neurologist, and he will speak on the medical aspects of Alzheimer's. So please mark your calendars for Tuesday, May 19th, at the same time as the webinar today, 11 o'clock on the West Coast, 2 p.m. on the East Coast. But today we believe the information you will receive will be worthwhile in understanding our current climate policies, the current situation where we find ourselves, and some of the grassroots success stories from our three panelists. Our featured speaker today is Alden Meyer. At this point, I'm going to thank Dan Ancona, who's the director for NACRA that is responsible for this webinar today. Dan, thank you, and take over from here.
Thank you, Luana. I'm really going to, first of all, introduce our speaker in a little detail here. Alden Meyer has 4 decades of experience in environmental and energy issues. Alden has previously been as in the Union of Concerned Scientists. He actually was the co-director of the Washington office for that organization, and also was the director of strategy and policy for that organization. He's testified before Congress on climate issues and energy issues. He's been a senior advisor to top-level federal administrations, including the Secretary of Energy's Advisory Board. He has also been, most notably, I would say, a delegate to 30 of the United Nations conferences on the Conference of Parties, what they call the COP, COP, which really address climate issues. That started back in 1991 and has been continuing. The most recent meeting, and I think he'll talk a little bit about it, was in Brazil, talking about the trying to preserve the rainforest. Alden is a noted speaker. He has been interviewed by virtually every major network news channel: ABC, NBC, CNN, NPR, NBC, the New York Times. He was on Reuters. He was recently quoted in the Washington Post. He's been on Sky News, BBC, and even Al Jazeera. So he's kind of famous worldwide. Alden is also a graduate of Yale and has a master's degree from the American University on human resources and organizational development. So Alden, I'm going to turn the mic over to you and let you do this thing.
Yes.
So what I'm going to talk about today is where we stand on the climate crisis and what we can do about it. And I will cover 4 questions. What is the Earth telling us? What are we seeing in the climate system now? Second, what is the world doing? Third, where is the US? And finally, what can we all do? And of course, that will be followed by 3 speakers on very concrete suggestions for projects that people can take on. So first of all, this is the latest report on the state of the global climate, which is an annual report the World Meteorological Organization puts out each year. The next version should come out later this month or in April, so this is the 2024 version. But basically, it acknowledges that we are at the highest levels of concentration of the three main greenhouse gases in the atmosphere that we've seen in the last 800,000 years. 2024 was the warmest year in the observational record, surpassing the previous warmest year by a fair amount. And each of the past 10 years were individually the 10 warmest years on record. So the trend here is pretty clear. If you look at, there we go. If you look at annual greenhouse gas emissions, you will see from 1850, which is kind of taken as the pre-industrial level, up to the current year, we are escalating pretty steadily there. Pretty sharp upward curve. And of course, we negotiated the first global treaty on climate change in 1992. And you can see since then, the curve has really not been bent much at all. So we are not really meeting the commitments that we set ourselves out to achieve over 30 years ago. The other interesting thing about this graph is the composition of regional contributions. You can see that over time, the developed countries, Europe, the US, other North America, have plateaued, stabilized, and come down a little bit. Well, the contributions of the developing world, particularly China, India, and other Asian countries, have expanded. So that's a key political dynamic here. That's why they call it global climate change. We really need to take global action. This is a similar graph from pre-industrial times through 2025 in terms of global mean temperature. And this is the difference from the average from 1850 to 1900. And you can see that pretty steady upward trend. You'll see that in 2025, and these were preliminary estimates, there was a slight decrease in temperature globally, probably as a result of La Nina and some of the other climate factors, but the predictions are that that will again resume its upward trend in the next years to come. You just look at some of the impacts that we're seeing from extreme weather events, which the probability is of them occurring is linked to increased temperatures and climate change. This is Hurricane Melissa that hit Jamaica as a Category 5 hurricane, causing damage estimated at 40% of the country's GDP, most devastating hurricane in Jamaican history. You have, of course, the Canadian wildfires, which many of us probably experienced personally, depending on where you were living, both last year and this year, causing hazardous air quality and triggering alerts in major metropolitan areas across Canada and the US. You saw in Thailand, northern Thailand, in July and August of last year, tropical storm Wifa affected nearly 300,000 people. And of course, there have been major floods in many other parts of the world. This is just an example. And you saw that in the Philippines, Super Typhoon Fenghuang, it forced the evacuation of nearly 1 million people last year. And this was hard on the heels of Typhoon Kalmegi, which left at least 224 people dead in the Central Island provinces in the Philippines. Here at home in 2025, there were 23 weather and climate disasters exceeding $1 billion in damages. Those events caused an estimated 276 fatalities and cost a total of $115 billion in average. And this places 2025 third behind just 2023 and 2024 for the annual number of billion-dollar disasters. So this is happening everywhere. It is a global problem. And this is a quote from the summary for policymakers of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report from 2022, which was the last in the series that they do every 5 or 6 years talking about the impacts of climate change and saying the science is unequivocal. Climate change is a threat to human well-being and the health of the planet. And any further delay in action will miss the brief, rapidly closing window to secure a livable future. So the scientists have been sounding the alarm on this for decades now. And of course, there has been some response, which we'll talk about in a minute, but nowhere near enough. And I like to show this slide. It's obviously a bit humorous, but also very serious because we have not taken anywhere near the level of action that we need to over the last 30 or 40 years. Unavoidable climate impacts are going to be coming at us over the next several decades, more serious than those we've experienced thus far. And we have to do everything to help communities deal with those impacts, adapt to them, try to respond to them, but there are limits to what that can do. So where is the world? This is just a few of the things that we have to do if we want to get our hands around this problem. We need to accelerate the deployment of clean energy technologies and the transition away from fossil fuels. Fossil fuels are responsible for nearly 3/4 of the problem of the emissions driving climate change. We also have to halt deforestation. That's both in the tropical rainforests in Brazil, the Congo, Indonesia, and elsewhere, but also in the boreal forests in the north. So this is a big effort, and I'll talk in a minute about what happened in Brazil on that. We need to also address the food system, agriculture and agriculture production, particularly livestock, responsible for a significant share of the emissions. We have to scale up finance going into both dealing with the impacts of climate change and financing the clean energy and industrial transitions. That has two components: scaling up public climate finance, that's both from national governments as well as from the multilateral development banks like the World Bank and the regional development banks, and also shifting the trillions, as it said, in private investment flows. We really need to mobilize the private sector to be directing their investments into this problem. And finally, we need to really help countries and communities both here and around the world deal with the impacts of climate change, because as I said, they're really unavoidable now, and they're going to be getting worse for the next period of time, even if we're successful in accelerating the reduction in emissions. The good news is that clean energy technologies, particularly solar and wind, are in most regions of the world the least expensive option for new electricity generation. So that is helping penetration of these technologies, but of course there are barriers in terms of access to finance, the cost of interest, particularly in some of the developing countries, integration with the grid and other issues, which is slowing it down. But the technologies are there, they are cost effective, and then deployment of them is picking up. Over the last decade or so, you will see that investment in clean energy technologies has far outstripped investment in fossil fuels. This, of course, does not include the continuing over $1 trillion a year in public subsidies for production and consumption of fossil fuels around the world. This is direct investment in technologies, but you can see a success story there in the scaling up of clean energy investment. It's not everything we need, but it's going in the right direction. You will see here the current level of renewable energy capacity in gigawatts in the major regions around the world, plus what was added in the last year in 2025. And you will see that Asia, and particularly China, outstrips the world. The scale of what China is doing on clean energy is truly staggering. You have to really dive deep to appreciate how large an investment is being made there. That's not to say that they're doing everything they need to do and bending their emissions. They're not. They're continuing to operate coal plants and even build some new ones. But their investment in both domestic deployment of renewable energy and export technologies is massive. The other point to make on this slide is if you put North America, Europe, and Asia together, you get the vast majority of both existing and additions to renewable energy capacity. So Africa in particular, the Middle East, other regions, Central America, way behind the curve, even though Africa has some of the best renewable energy resources in the world. That's not because of resource scarcity, it's because of finance, technical capacity, and other issues. So we need to address this imbalance globally. Despite what I just said about the good news on the renewables, the reality is the share of fossil fuels in the global energy system has only gone down from 83% of the total to 80% of the total over the last decade. So we're making some progress, but much of the increase in production from renewable energy is going to meet increasing energy demand, not to offset fossil energy production. And just a few hard realities here. I've spent a lot of my time, as Dan said, in the international negotiation process, and that's important. International agreements can set goals for where the world needs to go, but it's really national and subnational actors that are on the ground that make the difference. It's where the rubber meets the road. So we really need to have progress in implementation at the national and subnational level. The fossil fuel industry continues to have a strong power in this process, both the corporate interests as well as the fossil fuel producing countries. Clearly, there are concerns about energy security, the cost of living, affordability, economic competitiveness, and trade. Those have been growing in recent years, and that was even before the current conflict in the Middle East. And workers and communities most impacted by the transition, coal workers, oil workers, et cetera, have to be supported, both because that's the right thing to do. It's not fair to ask certain communities to bear the brunt of the cost of the transition, and also because if you don't do that, there will be tremendous political obstacles to achieving the pace of the transition that we need. Just to remind people that the agreement in Paris 10 years ago, or almost 11 years ago now, was to hold the increase in global average temperature to well below 2 degrees Celsius, or about 3.5 degrees Fahrenheit above pre-industrial levels, and pursuing efforts to limit the temperature increase to 1.5 Celsius. That was a very important addition, fought for and won by the small island states and other vulnerable countries with the support of a lot of civil society. And a report that was done after Paris by the IPCC showed that the impacts of climate change above 2 degrees would be far more severe than those at 1.5, even though we are now experiencing the impacts of climate change at just a little below 1.5. So this is sort of the benchmark that was set 10 years ago. This is what it would take to meet it. This is an annual report that the Climate Action Tracker group does of where we are versus where we need to be. The black line here is historical, what emissions have been in gigatons of carbon equivalent emissions per year. And you can see we had a slight decline there earlier in this decade, primarily as a result of COVID and the global lockdown and economic impact of that, but we basically resumed a growth recently. The light blue bars at the top there reflect where we will be if governments meet all of the pledges they have made to date out to 2035, which is the latest set of targets that countries have now put forward under Paris, and where they would be if they just implemented current policies and action to move towards those targets. And you can see it would start to bend the curve down, but the lower graph there, the green bar, is what we would need to achieve to be compatible with the 1.5 Celsius temperature limitation goal. And you can see that's a much steeper rate of reduction over the next 10 years than the path that we're currently on. As Dan said, I was at the climate summit, the annual climate summit in Belém, Brazil, at the mouth of the Amazon last November. It was clearly a history-making summit in the sense the first ever in the Amazon, and with pretty substantial representation from indigenous communities and a focus on biodiversity and forests. And there were some good announcements coming out of there in terms of a new facility to finance slowing down deforestation of the tropical rainforests and setting out a roadmap for policies. But there was no consensus among countries on producing a roadmap for the fossil fuel transition, despite the fact that the last COP, the COP in Dubai in 2024 had set a goal, or in 2023, excuse me, had set a goal of making the transition away from fossil fuels. There was no consensus on implementing that previous political commitment. There was opposition from the Saudis, from Russia, from a number of other countries. As a result, the Brazilians, who were the presidency of the COP, announced that they would conduct their own process to produce a fossil fuel transition roadmap and present it at the next Conference of the Parties meeting later this year. There was agreement to triple finance for adaptation by 2035 from the current level of around $40 billion a year. That was a pretty significant commitment, but of course it remains to be seen if it will be met given the scaling back of development assistance by a number of the developed countries. And of course, the United States has gotten pretty much out of the business of foreign assistance on climate. There was progress on what's called the action agenda, which is the actions being taken by states, cities, provinces, businesses, investors to advance the Paris goals. So that's got some momentum. And I think maybe one of the most significant achievements is, despite the very strong headwinds and the withdrawal of the US from the Paris Agreement, we were able to maintain multilateral climate cooperation, of course, with a lot of challenges. The next climate summit will be in Antalya, Turkey, in November of this year. It remains to be seen what the Turks will be able to deliver in terms of progress building on the outcomes in Brazil. They are also involved in a unique partnership with Australia, which was also bidding to host the summit in terms of running the negotiations, running the agenda. So that's a bit of an experiment, the first sort of hybrid presidency that we've had in 30 years of this process. So where is the US on all this? I don't think this is a shock to anyone that the president is not a big believer in global warming. In fact, has been doing everything he can to pull back the US from leadership on the climate issue. This is just a few of what could be a number of slides talking about some of the action that he and his administration have taken, starting on day one, withdrawing from the Paris Agreement, and then more recently announcing the intention to withdraw from the entire framework convention on climate change that was agreed to by President George H.W. Bush in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil in 1992, and unanimously ratified by the US Senate. Of course, in his first term, he also withdrew the US from the Paris Agreement, but not from the Framework Convention. So this is an even more dramatic move in terms of pulling out of the international process. Massive cuts across the board to federal climate and clean energy programs at all the agencies, and really cutting back, and including at NOAA and NASA and other places, in the ability of the US to continue research and observation of climate change, which is a concern to countries around the world, because the US has been a leader there. Removing climate information from government websites, withdrawing offshore wind permits, and now proposing to pay Total in France nearly $1 billion in taxpayer money to give up on their efforts to build offshore wind off the Northeast coast. Of course, revoking the electric vehicle goals that were established by the previous administration, and the list goes on. Congress started early on last year repealing energy efficiency standards and the fee on methane emissions for the oil and gas sector that had been part of the Biden administration. agenda, they also repealed most of the tax incentives for solar, wind, electric vehicles, building efficiency, and clean energy manufacturing that had been part of federal law, including with the Inflation Reduction Act under the last administration, and they cut royalty fees on oil and gas production on federal lands. And in terms of the courts, it's kind of a mixed bag. A lot of cases are still making their way through the court system. Very few of them have reached the Supreme Court. The biggest one probably will be the effort by the Environmental Protection Agency to overturn what's called the endangerment finding, which was a scientific finding based on a previous Supreme Court decision that climate change, global warming did pose a health threat to the American people, and therefore regulation was needed. So this is a work in progress. As the saying goes, the wheels of justice turn slowly. So this will be something to keep an eye on over the next few years. I should mention that President Trump and the Congress are not the only actors here. There's a very significant coalition of governors, mayors, business leaders, investors, and others representing over half of the US population and nearly 2/3 of US GDP that's a part of this coalition called America is All In. You can go to their website there on the bottom of the slide, americasallin.com, if you want to find out more about them. But they have committed to try to continue to meet the US obligations under the Paris Agreement and are continuing to make investments in clean energy and other climate solutions. And as I mentioned earlier, the trends in renewable energy have been quite favorable. And you can see that despite some of the headwinds out of Washington, the investment in the electric industry continues to be dominated by solar, wind, and energy storage. Very little going into fossil fuel production. You'll see at the beginning of this century, that landscape was dominated by natural gas. There continues to be a little bit of investment in natural gas, but overwhelmingly the new energy production in the US is coming from renewable energy technologies. So I wanted just to say a bit about a program of research that's been done by the Yale program of climate change communication. Over the last decade or so, they've developed what they call 6 Americas. Based on their public opinion surveys, they have a group of alarmed people, which certainly would include me and perhaps some of you, about what is happening with this problem. Those who are concerned, those who are cautious, a little bit on the fence, have heard things on both sides and don't know which way they side. Those who are disengaged, those who are not spending much time thinking about it at all. Those who are skeptical or doubtful, and then a hardcore of Americans who are dismissive of the need to do anything about climate change. This is their most recent survey from last November showing the percentage of Americans that fall into each of these categories. So you'll see if you take the alarmed and concerned together, you get about 54%, 53% of Americans. So that shows that a majority support action despite what we're seeing at the national level. And if you look at the trend on this, since they started these surveys back in 2015, you will see that that share of people that are concerned or alarmed has grown from 41% to 52% or so. Largely people shifting out of the concerned category into the alarmed category. But there is still a hardcore 11 or 12% that are really dismissive of this, and another chunk that are doubtful. And I would say particularly that's a factor in the Republican Party positioning on this issue. Many of those people, not all, many of them are Republicans, and they're expressing their views in their political engagement on the Republican side. So finally, what can we do about all of this? First of all, thanks to all of you who are attending today. One of the most important things is to keep educating ourselves and others about the problem and what we can do about it. Second thing is to realize that we need action at every level. So wherever you feel comfortable focusing and engaging, whether that's in your own life and in ways to reduce your own carbon footprint. My former organization, Union of Concerned Scientists, has a guide called Cooler, Smarter out on that, which you can access to show how you can do that. Other organizations have similar guides. Communities, we'll be talking about some of that with the other speakers later on, what we can do in our own neighborhoods, our own living facilities, etc. Corporations, obviously focusing on businesses, companies, investors. That's a key part of the problem. States and regions, as I talked about with America's All In. Federal is important, talking to your member of Congress, pushing for additional action, and then international. So if you're so inclined to engage in advocacy on this issue, there are a number of opportunities, and you should be connecting with others in your communities and your states who are engaging on climate action, connecting with them and figuring out how you can engage, or your organizations and committees can engage at the local level. One thing that I always say is, if you care about this issue, vote for candidates who are committed to climate action. Do the research on that, look at some of the guides, ask questions at the town hall meetings, see what they're saying, and let that influence your voting decisions. And finally, and this is a very personal one for me, is managing the balance between hope and grief. Because if you're not grieving, you don't really understand what's going on fully, and you're not in touch with that and acknowledging the reality of what we're facing and what we've lost because we haven't taken enough action over the last several decades. But if you shift from grief into despair and give up on hope, you can't be effective and have the agency to make a difference. So acknowledging the reality of both hope and grief and trying to balance those in what you do is important. And I will leave it there and turn it back over to Dan.
Yeah, that was a very enlightening presentation, Alden. Thank you very, very much. I think it ended up giving us a little bit of hope. Now, what I'm going to do is add to the hope side of things and talk about some projects that have been implemented that are significant. And we've zeroed in on 3 different areas, trying to give you some ideas in different parts of the whole scope for doing our share for the climate and sustainability. I'm going to start out with a project that was implemented at Meadow Ridge in Redding, Connecticut. Susan Auslander is going to give us a story about their solar project. Susan is a graduate of the New York City University and the Hunter College there. She's worked in journalism for a bunch of different organizations: the Albany New York Times Union, New York Times Public Relations, and she's more recently been involved in fundraising and putting together programs for the YWCA and for the National Trust for Historic Preservation. Susan is a dynamo. She is a mother of 4, a grandmother of 10, and a great grandmother of 2. She, by the way, said I could tell you that she's 92 years old and still going strong. So, yeah. Susan, if you would give us a little bit of the story about how you put this solar project together.
Thanks so much, Dan. And also setting the stage with the prior speaker was terrific. As Dan said, I'm Susan Auslander. I've had the pleasure of living here at Meadow Ridge in Redding, Connecticut for almost 9 years. We are set on 136 beautiful acres. But I'm the person who spearheaded this drive for Meadow Ridge to go solar. I had, and perhaps our story will motivate you all to consider doing the same. When I had first came to Meadow Ridge, I joined our building committee. And while there, I found out that our utility bill was $1 million a year, which was pretty wild. Meadow Ridge does have a large population. We have about 400 residents. It's a 25-year-old community. We have independent living, assisted living, a memory care, and a 65-bed skilled nursing and rehab facility. But I saw our electricity bill at, well, not utility, 60% was electricity, $1 million a year. Wow, that seemed very high. So what I did is form a committee of fellow residents who are interested. I figured the best way to attack this environmentally, what we had in mind was good, but if we could sell it through the economics, that seemed to make more sense. So we visited other facilities in the area with solar, and that was part of my education because I'm not an engineer, although I do have a couple of engineers on our committee. And some of the residents on this committee had solar panels on their homes before they came to Meadow Ridge. And we are a for-profit organization. David Reese of Greenwich owns Meadow Ridge, and he came a few years ago to talk to our board and asked if we had any questions. So, of course, I asked him if he had considered when they built Meadow Ridge about 2000, if they'd explored solar. He said they had, but it wasn't feasible. So I asked him if he and his financial guru, Brett Millman, might take another look because solar had come down greatly in price, and reminded him that our utility bill was $1 million annually. And then a few years back, we've had a change in management company, Benchmark, and they were receptive to solar, which was good. And our new director, Chris Barstein, was also supportive of our lobbying efforts. We had residents write to emails to Chris, and finally he said, stop. But anyway, ownership decided in 2023 to go forward, and they did make a positive decision, but it was also a good business decision for them. Because on the federal level, there was a 30% investment tax credit, which amounted to $1.2 million. And on the state level, many states have green banks. If you're not sure where or what it's called, call your governor's office is my suggestion. But anyway, we had a low interest rate loan of 6.5% on the loan that we took out to cover this. And our electric company, Eversource, gave us a capital grant of $725,000 under the zero emissions program. But if your CCRC is a nonprofit, you could always go ahead with this and do a power purchase agreement. A young woman I'm mentoring at the high school was able to get a positive go-ahead. I spoke with her on her behalf. Because the federal incentives, as Alden related to us, are going away, we could use that as a cudgel. They've got to quickly move forward because the investment tax credits disappear in July. So they made a decision, and that's good. So that's another set of carports. But on our local level, Connecticut state law prevents the town from raising our taxes on this new solar power plant. And there are no limits on the amount of solar that we can have. I was glad to testify before the State Legislative Energy Committee about that recently. Now, the cost of our solar project here is $3.2 million, and it's projected to save us $5 million over the 25-year life of the project. But this is not fact, but just a suggestion that with the rapidly escalating, with Iran, et cetera, price of electricity, it may pay for itself well before the projected time. And environmental terms, listen to these figures. This is according to the U.S. Environmental EPA, Environmental Protection Administration. We offset through our solar power plant 585 metric tons of carbon this year, and that is equivalent to first the annual emissions of a gas-powered car traveling nearly 1.5 million miles, or the annual energy use of 78 single-family homes, or the energy used to charge more than 47 million cell phones. So that's quite a lot of juice. The Meadow Ridge ownership started work in 2023 to provide a new roof for a nursing home, which was nice. It was a $500,000 roof, which is part of the Green Bank grant. And it would then be covered with solar panels. We also have major size carports covered with solar panels over the nursing home parking lot and the staff parking lots. This gives us a total of 1,344 solar panels, and it provides an average of 20% of our 5 megawatt hours of daily power consumption. We have 3 apartment buildings here, an activity center, plus the nursing home, and we cook with gas. But anyway, we're delighted at Meadow Ridge to leave a cleaner, greener atmosphere for our children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. And the key to our success, I think, was to first organize a group of residents, and then second, to sell this to ownership and management from an economic point of view, but also to have them buy into the fact that it was the right thing to do. I wish you all the best of luck in bringing your solar power to your retirement community. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Susan. That's a powerful story, and it's amazing what you've been able to do. Our next speaker is S.J. Light. S.J. Light lives as a resident of the Windcrest community in Highlands, Colorado. She is very active in that area. She's on the water board district water board. She interestingly was involved in a lawsuit and got a settlement for a $3 million project to eliminate what they call PFAS from the water supply. But the big thing is that the community that she lives in, Windcrest, which is a pretty good sized community, is done a whole bunch of changes to limit their water consumption. So we're going to talk about we've done solar. We're going to talk about water conservation.
Dan, before she begins, would you switch over to the slideshow mode? We're in edit mode right now.
How's that? Better?
Yes.
Thank you. Sorry about that. SJ, you on?
I am. Hi, I'm S.J. Light. I live in the Windcrest CCRC that's about 30-minute drive south of Denver, Colorado. We're a semi-arid climate, Highlands Ranch, Colorado, and we have 85 acres, 2,200 residents. And I wanted to include this photo just to give you a little sample of our lovely winters here and the fact that we get to look out on the Rocky Mountains every single day. So hopefully that gives you a little smile. I hope that we all agree that water is a vital life resource that is becoming even more precious. What I'd like to share with you today is how the Windcrest community significantly reduced its water. And I've got 3 simple steps here for you to follow. We went out and we contacted our local water district, first of all, to determine how much water our community used. And they can give you all that data for both your outside water and your inside water. And much to our amazement, our water usage was high. Not only was it high, we were one of the top 5 water abusers in our town. So we knew we had an issue. When we narrowed it down, we found out that a lot of that water that we were using was due to our irrigation system, which is the outdoor water for our trees, plants, and grasses. And we asked our water district if they had any way they could help us out. And they certainly rose to the occasion. What they did was they gave us free a $13,000 research study of our irrigation system. And they found that it was 16 years old and a lot of new technology had been introduced that we had not taken advantage of. So we spent almost 2 years, and I'll give you those statistics in a bit, reducing our water. And during that time, what we did was we worked really hard to build up support with our other residents and the management team to reduce our water and to use these available programs from the water district. What we did while we were working on this, we had monthly articles in our Windcrest newsletter. When we finished the project, we got a lovely coverage in our community newspaper that's called the Highlands Ranch Herald. And we were delighted that we even got coverage in the Denver Post. And we've continued on. So let's look at what our actual water savings were. Okay, in 2020, when we began this project, we used a little over 33 million gallons of water every year. When we finished this project in 2022, we were using a little over 18 million gallons of water a year. That was huge. And to kind of put that in context for you, that's an annual savings of over 15 million gallons. And the delight, not only were we doing the right thing, we were also being fiscally smart because it saved us $57,000 every year in water fees. And to understand that better, it would be the equivalent of our actually shutting off our outdoor water system for 5 months. That's how much we saved, 5 months of irrigation water. And when we looked at our greater community, it was the annual water usage of 150 homes. So we were absolutely delighted with those results. Now I want to take your eyes to this beautiful blue photo on the side of this slide. I'm sure many of you were watching the Winter Olympics and hopefully saw the closing ceremony. The country of Italy made a decision to focus their closing ceremony on water resources. They had dancers dancing in snow. They had objects that were coming down from the ceiling that looked like gigantic rings of ice with their dancers in it. And all of it was an artistic way to say to us, get on board. We've got to save this water now. So I'm really encouraging you to work with all of your communities to see what you can do, because Windcrest was able to make a very big difference. So that's how a community can save water, but there are also a number of ways that individual residents can save water. Unfortunately, my talk today was limited to 5 minutes. So what I've been able to do is get 2 websites that you can reference that offer various ways for individuals to save water. So my advice to you is to read these and pick one, and don't make it your New Year's Eve resolution folly. Make it something that's interesting to you, something that wouldn't require a major life change, and do it for 3 months. And I think that after 3 months, you'll be delighted that it's become a habit now and you don't even have to think about it. So then go back to the list, pick another thing, try it for 3 months. And again, I think you'll be delighted. So I'm encouraging you to keep looking at these types of lists and to keep going And very importantly, see if you can get started tomorrow. Get started before it's too late. Thank you.
Thank you, SJ. Yeah, the list that she was talking about, we've added that to the site that has handouts that are going to be added to this, describe various parts of this program. And on the invitation that you got, it provided the link to that particular location. But that list of 20 suggestions is posted there now. We also want to talk about energy savings in communities. Kate Wilson is going to give us a rundown on what she is a resident here at Green Spring Village in Springfield, Virginia. She's been here since 2022. She's chair of the Green Spring Environmental Sustainability Subcommittee of the General Services Committee. Her committee focuses on a wide variety of things, on recycling, organic waste processing, composting, but also one of the big things is big projects to try and save energy. What she's going to talk to us about is a project that actually occurred before her watch, but she dug into it because she wanted to know, first of all, what it did, but second of all, how they made projects like energy savings work in a big community like Green Spring. Kate, I'll give you the ball. Go ahead.
Thank you, Dan. And I just want to say how impressed I am with Susan and SJ. I can't wait to do some more research. This is my first year. I just began my second year on the committee, but I'm the chair this year. And as Dan said, I didn't move here until 2022. And what I'm going to talk about occurred between 2015 and 2018. But I was trying to wondering what the windows and doors meant at Green Spring. And I think there's two stories. And one is there's a story about providing comfort and safety for residents. And also talking about what we're doing today with climate change, looking at what does this do for people and for our use of energy. And the other is how the community can work together. I thought about when Bob and I moved here, it was just after COVID. And remember being isolated in your apartment when you tested positive? As I learned a bit about the history of the replacement of these windows and doors, I found that the actions taken by residents and management in 2015 significantly impacted the residents' experience of COVID. Just imagine being confined to your apartment with windows that leaked enough to freeze an orchid sitting on a northwest facing window. And that was the experience of at least one resident prior to installation.
Wow.
And imagine the foresight of residents back in 2012 who, like many of you, recognizing the needs that are in front of us, recognizing the comfort and safety that needs for our residents, worked with management to replace all the windows and doors throughout the campus. And because of their foresight and persistence, at least the apartments were comfortable, warm in the winter and cool in the summer during the long COVID period. Green Spring opened in 1998 on 58 acres in Fairfax County, Virginia. There are about 1,400 independent living spaces and about 270 continuing care residents making up the campus. By 2012, complaints from residents that the windows in the apartment were extremely drafty, hard to open or close, and problematic for maintaining a level of comfort came to a head. And recognizing that approximately 40% of a building's heat loss was attributed to windows and doors, they began to request that the installation of updated energy-efficient windows and doors be added to the annual budget. Next slide. By 2015, the installation of new windows and doors campus-wide was a significant part of the new budget, and thus a 3-year installation process began. By 2018, 5,270 windows and doors had been replaced with double-glazed glass units. Obviously, this led to markedly increased comfort for residents, along with ease in opening and closing the windows. And the 20-year warranty promised that these results would continue for a significant amount of time. As far as savings, it is very difficult for us to find what are the actual dollar savings that have occurred, simply because it is difficult to do that over time when you have different weather patterns, when you have different degree days, etc. However, the estimated savings was that it would be pay for itself in about 5 years. 5 years. It cost close to $5 million, like those solar panels. And the project, however, was self-financed by reserves from resident fees. And that's significant because, as Susan mentioned, there are no federal financing incentives for not-for-profit communities. And as you can see from the slide, as you can see from the slide, it looked like a really interesting project, difficult over 3 years. But when I asked residents recently at dinner if they could tell me what it was like during the installation, one gentleman looked at me rather quizzically and said, it was a non-event. It was no more troublesome than when housekeeping comes yearly to clean the windows. So the project itself was difficult, but it was well organized and occurred over a 3-year period, cost us a significant amount of money, but hopefully at this point we have saved enough to have paid that off. Thank you.
Susan, that was fantastic. Excuse me, Kate, it was fantastic. One of the reasons we wanted to give you 3 very diverse examples was to say that when you start taking action in your retirement community, think with an open box. Think about things like energy efficiency, the examples that we showed you. Think about water conservation and everything from low flow fixtures to doing simple things like turning the water off when you brush your teeth. And there's lots of things like that that can be done. This whole question of waste management, recycling, composting, and particularly handling plastics and glass are really important areas that you can put together programs for your community. Buildings and doors, things like that. There's a trend now to look at plant-based meals and cut down on micro and nanoplastics and using reusable containers. Big thing, I think, is the bottom line, though, you got to have management acceptance, and the way we've showed in each of the cases here is that working with your management organization and having dialogue on these important issues is really what you needed to do. Now, there is a lot of room, though, for improvement. The study that Ziegler Capital did they were assessing green initiatives in communities back in 2023. They haven't redone that survey recently, but they showed that only 19% of the communities had solar panels. And that was a surprise to me because so many of the retirement communities are in the Sun Belt and in an area that one would expect things like solar panels would be commonplace. That was not the case, both for electricity generation and for water heating. So I think that tells you that there's a lot of room for improvement here. It also was interesting that it was a larger percentage that had charging stations for electric vehicles, because I think that's where a lot of new residents are coming from with their electric cars. What I would like to do now, though, is open the discussion to questions and answers. I'd like to introduce Charles Nadler, who has been cataloging the comments that have been coming in, and some came in ahead of time. Charles, would you take the ball, please?
Sure. So the first question is one actually not for the speakers to answer. It came from Bill Hoffman in advance from Rock Creek, and he's been trying to get solar energy and renewable energy sources at his community and has not been very successful. So he wondered whether and how other communities are using solar generated or other renewable energy sources. And of course, Susan already gave us a talk about that a little bit. And Dan also gave us some numbers. So the question really is directed at the people who are watching this presentation. And what they should do is either send the information about what's going on in their communities to me, and I can post them in a forum on our website, or they can go to the website and post them in a forum. Secondly, I have a question that came in advance for Alden. How does the recent cold, snowy weather reconcile with climate change? In other words, he's referring to the people who are skeptics and see global warming as a hoax. So, Alden?
Sure. Well, that question comes up a lot, and there is confusion between climate and weather. Weather is what you get on a day-to-day basis. It obviously varies a lot. You get extremes of heat and cold. You get extremes of drought and precipitation, whether it's snow or rain. Here in Washington, last week we had one day that I think hit a record of 84 or 85 degrees. The next day we were down in the mid 30s and having snow. So that's what we experience. Climate is over years or decades. It's the trend in the system. And actually, the scientists, and I should make clear, my background's economics and public policy. I'm not a climate scientist, but the climate scientists I talk to say you really need to understand that you're talking about swings in variability and extremes. So we know that climate change, heating of the planet, puts more water in the atmosphere, sort of increases the hydrological cycle, and that can result in more extreme downfalls, more snowfall, etc. And what they also say is you have to think about it as loading the dice. This was something that Jim Hansen, who was the one that testified before Congress in 1988, saying global warming was upon us, used as an analogy that you're not saying that you're going to get a 6 every time you roll the dice, but if 3 or 4 sides of the dice are 6s, you're more likely to get a 6. So you're kind of loading the dice in favor of more extremes. And of course, having snowfall does not mean that climate change is unreal. You're still going to get variability in weather. You're still going to get cold weather. You're still going to get snowfall. But over time, you're increasing the trend away from that kind of weather. And actually, the ski industry, both here and around the world, is among the most concerned economic sectors because over the long term, climate change is leading to less snowfall. So there's a lot of confusion between short-term weather and long-term climate, but trust me, the scientists have looked at this and they're saying you're increasing stresses on the system by what humans are doing, and it's far beyond natural variability and the influence of sort of geological factors.
Okay, another question for Alden is the impact of AI power usage and the growth of that on global warming.
Sure, and of course this is something that's happening, particularly in this country, but around the world, that the data centers that the technology companies are building to accommodate the explosive growth in use of AI systems is leading to increases in power demand. And here in the US, until recently, we were pretty flat in terms of growth in electricity demand, despite the economy growing. We had sort of decoupled through energy efficiency, demand side management by utilities, because the cheapest form of energy is energy you don't use. So if you can make your buildings more efficient, drive a more efficient vehicle, et cetera, you're coming out ahead. But we are seeing a spike in both current and projected demand for electricity related to these data centers. It's not the only factor, but it's a major one. And as you're all aware, this is becoming a heated political issue at the local level across the country. And people are pushing back on these data centers, both for energy use and for water use in some places as well, in terms of putting stress on the system and leading to increases in utility bills. So I think even President Trump has expressed concern about this and called on the data centers to take their fair share of the cost. And some of the companies are doing that, as I understand. It's not my area of specialty, but I understand some of them are doing that and financing their own power production, both because they're aware of the political consequences if they don't, and also because sometimes that's a faster way to get access to the increased power they need than waiting for the utility companies to get the permits and build the new plants and transmission lines.
Okay, another question about food waste, and what do they do in other countries, and how do we compare with what they do, and how do other countries deal with organic wastes? And are there models of effective practices that could be adopted in the U.S. and in continuing care communities?
That's not an area I'm a specialist on. If either of the other three speakers know anything about that in terms of U.S., let me know. I know there are a lot of programs around the world to deal with food waste. It's a staggering amount of food that is wasted, and the environmental and cost impact of that is great, particularly since we're facing great hunger in many places around the world. We could try to maybe find some examples for Dan to include in the resource list of some groups in other countries that are doing this. I see KS has a point. SJ has a point.
SJ, unmute. Unmute.
Or Kate, can you speak to that?
Let me get her.
Yeah. You have to unmute. There you go.
I think we're waiting for SJ to unmute, but we are just actually now looking into this as a possibility here. In Riderwood, which is an Erickson community in Maryland, they do compost all their food waste from the kitchens as well as residents themselves. We've applied for a pilot program to start one here at Green Spring, but it would just be for 1 year, 6 months, to try to see if we can be effective in at least getting the pilot going. People could be bringing their scraps to a bin. It would be taken out by a composting company. And then at the end of it, see where do we stand, and can we convince the management to then begin to compost the kitchen waste.
SJ?
Yeah, we've been working on this for several years, and you're right about Riderwood. The positive thing is that the state of Maryland passed a law that required Riderwood to do that. Mm-hmm. So don't think that they did it just because of a sustainability effort. The first thing you have to do is find out what are the resources in your community to handle food waste. For you to handle significant food waste yourself, oh gosh, I don't think you want to do that on your own campus. So you want to find out who in your community can handle that for you. We have been doing for 2 years. We worked with a group called Conservation Colorado, and we have a bin in the back of one of our buildings. And then residents paid $15 a month to put their food waste in there, and then they pick it up. And then in the springtime, we can go and collect that as compost for our gardens. So it's very effective, but you have to have residents who are willing to pay for that. Mm-hmm. And we have not been able to budge our management in spite of Riderwood's success to do this. It's just been extremely painful.
Charles, before you go any further with questions, I want to make sure people know that they can leave. We are well over our 1 hour time, and we will continue if we have additional questions. So, Charles, what is in your goodie box there for questions?
I don't have any more questions.
Great.
Okay. All right. Is that everything? Any more comments from the panel? Alden, Kate, SJ, or Susan? Well,
I
we
would just
want
say I've taken many notes now because I'm really interested in what you have done, particularly Susan and SJ, how you did it, and the steps you took. I think they are absolutely wonderful, and thank you.
I think we also need to pick up the point that Charles Nadler made earlier. This is going to be a continuing dialogue. We're going to create a place on the forum, the NACRA's communication channel, and I encourage you to go visit that. If you log into the NACRA site, you can find the forum and see the different topics that are available. So this is something that needs to continue, and we're going to be adding additional documents to that section of the handouts from this program. That's all I have. Luana, do you want to close us
Yes,
out?
I just want to make a tag along on that comment, Dan, that you just made about posting on the NACRA.com website. Generally, posting is restricted to members. However, we have just put in a brand new link that allows non-NACRA members to post to our website in a conversation forum for other non-members. So I would suggest, if you're not a NACRA member, and you have comments on this topic, that you post there. Those will be brought over into the forum side where only NACRA members can post. But it is NACRA.com right on the home page. If you're a non-member, you are free to post there, and we'd love to see all the comments that come in from this. And I'd also like to thank the speakers and Alden for your time and patience with us today, and also the attendees. I think this has been very valuable, and it is an ongoing concerning issue. So thank you all, and hope to see you on May 19th, which is the next webinar for NACRA.
I just
Goodbye.
want to add before we close that as someone that has to deal with a lot of bad news in my daily work life on this issue, it was really inspiring to hear Susan and SJ and Kate with three very different examples of effective action that's being taken in communities around the country. That's what keeps those of us going, I think, that are engaged on this issue, is to hear the good news stories. So thank you for that.
Let's ramp it up.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right. Thank you all.
Okay. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.